The evening glow of Beverly Hills cast a golden shimmer across the sleek luxury cars lined up outside Lumiere, a restaurant synonymous with exclusivity and opulence. Inside, the warm light from crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors and glimmering glassware. Every detail, from the faint jazz melodies playing in the background to the immaculately dressed patrons in silk gowns and tailored suits, spoke of wealth and refinement. This was a place where appearances were everything, a sanctuary for the elite to dine in unspoken competition of elegance. Evelyn Harper, one of Lumiere's most experienced waitresses, stood at the reception desk. Her uniform was spotless, her blonde hair tied neatly into a sleek bun. Evelyn was the epitome of poise, but beneath her professional smile lay a quiet arrogance. To her, Lumiere wasn't just a workplace. It was a stage where she was a gatekeeper of class, separating those who belonged from those who didn't. As she scanned the room with a critical eye, the door opened, and a towering figure entered. Shaun Carter, known to many as Shaq, walked in, dressed in a simple grey t-shirt, track pants, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. His outfit clashed starkly with the haute couture and shimmering jewels around him. His calm stride and broad shoulders commanded attention, yet his attire seemed to challenge the very ethos of Lumiere. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. To her, Shaun was a disruption to the harmony she valued. She silently judged him, her thoughts unkind. Who does he think he is, walking in here dressed like that? She wondered. She dismissed him as someone seeking to experience wealth, but who likely couldn't afford it. Shaun, unbothered by the murmurs and stolen glances of other patrons, approached Evelyn. "Good evening," he said, his deep voice warm and steady. "I'd like a table for one." Evelyn's practiced smile faltered. She hesitated, quickly masking her disapproval with a tone laced with condescension. "Good evening," she replied. "Are you sure this is where you'd like to dine?" Her words were polite, but the insinuation was clear. Shaun's face remained unreadable, his demeanor calm. "Yes," he said simply. "I'd like to try it." The tension hung heavy in the air. Evelyn paused, debating whether to press further. Finally, she nodded and gestured toward the dining area. "Follow me," she said, her tone betraying an edge of superiority. As Shaun followed her through the restaurant, heads turned. Whispers rippled among the tables. Some patrons recognized him, their curiosity piqued. Others, like Evelyn, focused solely on his appearance. When Evelyn stopped, it wasn't at one of the prime tables under the chandelier's golden glow. Instead, she led him to a dimly lit corner near the kitchen doors, a table far removed from the glamour of Lumiere. Placing the menu on the table with a deliberate thud, she smiled thinly. "This should suit your style," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm. Shaun met her gaze, unflinching. "Thank you," he said evenly, pulling out the chair and sitting down. Evelyn turned on her heel, confident she had asserted her dominance. But the unshaken calm in Shaun's eyes left an unsettling impression, a flicker of uncertainty that began to chip away at her facade. The night was far from over, and the unassuming man in casual clothes was about to teach everyone at Lumiere a lesson they would never forget. Shaun Carter sat quietly at the small, dimly lit table Evelyn had chosen for him. The clinking of silverware and murmurs of other patrons filled the air, but he seemed oblivious to the stares and whispers directed his way. He flipped open the menu, scanning its pages with an expression of genuine interest. From behind the reception desk, Evelyn Harper kept a watchful eye on him. Her lips curled into a smug smirk as she whispered to a fellow server. "He doesn't belong here," she said, her voice just loud enough for nearby diners to catch. "I bet he's one of those types who orders water, looks at the prices, and then leaves." Her colleague, a young waiter named Andrew, frowned slightly but said nothing. He glanced at Shaun, who seemed perfectly at ease despite the palpable judgment surrounding him. Evelyn turned to another guest with her trademark smile, yet her thoughts remained locked on Shaun. "Why does someone like that even bother coming to a place like this?" she mused. To her, he was a puzzle that didn't fit the polished image of Lumiere, a man dressed in worn sneakers among designer heels and tailored suits. Moments later, she approached Shaun's table with a deliberate air of superiority. "Have you decided, sir?" she asked, her voice syrupy yet condescending. Her eyes flicked briefly to his sneakers before meeting his gaze. Shaun looked up, unbothered. "Yes, I'll have the filet mignon Rossini," he said, pointing to the menu. His tone was steady, almost casual. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "The filet mignon?" she repeated, her voice tinged with mock disbelief. "That's $350. She let the price hang in the air, expecting him to falter. Shaun smiled faintly. "Sounds delicious. I'll take it." Her composure slipped for a fraction of a second. She had expected hesitation, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, his calm acceptance felt like a quiet rebuke, though he hadn't said a single unkind word. She forced a smile and jotted down the order. "Very well," she said curtly before turning on her heel. As she walked back to the kitchen, Evelyn muttered under her breath, loud enough for Andrew to hear, "He probably doesn't even know what he's ordering." People like him just want to play pretend. The tension in the room thickened. Patrons nearby exchanged uneasy glances. A young woman named Lisa Chen, seated with a business associate, leaned closer to whisper, "She's being ridiculous. He hasn't done anything wrong." Across the room, Edward Clark adjusted his glasses and spoke quietly to his wife. Remarkable. Most people would have reacted by now. But him? Not a word. Shaun remained the picture of tranquility, glancing around the room as if nothing unusual was happening. But his calm demeanor only heightened the curiosity and unease of those watching. Evelyn's repeated attempts to rattle him were failing, yet she seemed determined to prove herself superior. The stage was set, the audience drawn in. What they didn't realize was that the unassuming man in the corner wasn't playing along with Evelyn's game. He was waiting, calm, patient, and entirely in control of a narrative that was about to take an unexpected turn. Evelyn Harper returned to Shaun Carter's table, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Her every movement was deliberate, calculated to draw attention to her supposed dominance over the situation. With the plate of filet mignon Rossini balanced effortlessly on her tray, she approached the dimly lit corner near the kitchen where she had seated Shaun. The table was an afterthought, tucked away from the elegance of the main dining area. The soft hum of the kitchen and occasional clang of pots filled the air, a stark contrast to the refined ambience enjoyed by the other patrons. Evelyn had chosen it intentionally, her earlier comment echoing in Shaun's mind. "This table should match your style." As she placed the plate before him, she let it land with a soft, calculated thud, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "Here's your filet mignon Rossini," she said with an exaggerated sweetness. "I hope it meets your expectations." Shaun looked at her, his expression calm, unbothered by the veiled insult. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady. Evelyn lingered for a moment, expecting some reaction, perhaps discomfort or hesitation, but Shaun's composed demeanor was unyielding. Frustrated, she turned abruptly and walked away, her lips pressing into a thin line as she muttered under her breath. Across the room, the tension was palpable. Several patrons had noticed Evelyn's overtly dismissive behavior, their glances shifting between her retreating figure and the man seated in the corner. At a central table bathed in warm chandelier light, Edward and Margaret Clark observed the scene with growing unease. Edward, a distinguished man with silver hair and an air of quiet authority, leaned closer to his wife. "He's remarkably composed," he murmured. "Most would have walked out by now." Margaret nodded, her brow furrowed in concern. "It's disgraceful. She's treating him like he doesn't belong. Why isn't the manager stepping in?" Not far from the Clarks, Lisa Chen, a sharp-eyed businesswoman in her 30s, sipped her wine, her gaze fixed on Evelyn. She leaned toward her dining companion. "That waitress has been out of line since the moment he walked in," she said, her tone clipped. "It's making everyone uncomfortable." Her companion nodded. "He doesn't seem to care, though. Look at him, calm as a mountain. It's almost like he's waiting for something. Meanwhile, Shaun began his meal, cutting into the fillet with deliberate precision. He chewed slowly, his movements unhurried, as if savoring both the food and the experience of being in the eye of a brewing storm. His demeanor didn't just confound Evelyn, it unsettled her. From her vantage point at the service counter, Evelyn stole glances at Shaun, her irritation growing with every passing moment. Why doesn't he react? Why isn't he flustered? She thought, biting her lip. The whispers among the diners grew louder. A ripple of disapproval spread through the room, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time that evening, it wasn't Shaun who looked out of place. It was Evelyn. Shaun Carter folded the menu and set it down with deliberate calm. As Evelyn returned to his table, she straightened her posture, her sharp heels clicking against the polished floor like a drumbeat of authority. "Have you decided, sir?" she asked. Her voice dipped in saccharine politeness that barely masked her condescension. "Yes," Shaun replied, his tone even. "I'll have the filet mignon Rossini." For a moment, Evelyn froze. "The filet mignon Rossini?" she echoed, her lips curling into a subtle smirk. "That's $350, she added, enunciating the price with unnecessary precision. Her eyes scanned his casual outfit as if it confirmed her suspicions. Shaun nodded without hesitation. "It sounds perfect." Her smirk widened. "Perfect," she repeated, as though mocking his choice. She scribbled the order onto her notepad, but instead of walking away, she lingered. Leaning slightly forward, she lowered her voice just enough to create an air of mock intimacy. "You know, this dish is sophisticated. Not everyone's palate is used to something so refined." Shaun looked up, his eyes meeting hers with quiet resolve. "Thank you for the advice," he said, his tone steady, unshaken. Evelyn straightened, a faint flicker of frustration crossing her face as she walked back to the service counter. Passing her colleague Andrew, she couldn't help but vent. "Can you believe it?" she said, her voice just loud enough for the diners at nearby tables to hear. "People like him just order the most expensive thing on the menu to look important. He probably doesn't even know what Rossini means." Andrew frowned but remained silent, his discomfort evident. Evelyn, however, seemed emboldened by her own commentary. At a nearby table, Lisa Chen overheard the exchange. She leaned toward her companion, her tone laced with disapproval. "She's out of line," Lisa whispered. "He hasn't done anything wrong. Why is she so focused on humiliating him?" Her companion, a composed man in his late 30s, nodded. "It's like she's trying to prove something. But look at him. He doesn't seem to care at all." Indeed, Shaun remained an island of calm amidst the growing storm. Seated in his dimly lit corner, he quietly observed the room. His gaze lingered on the grand chandelier overhead, the polished marble floor, and the vibrant conversations flowing between tables. To an outsider, he appeared completely detached from Evelyn's pointed remarks, his composure exuding an unspoken authority. Evelyn, however, couldn't shake her irritation. His silence felt less like submission and more like defiance, a refusal to engage with her subtle provocations. The harder she pushed, the more resolute he seemed, as if her efforts to belittle him only strengthened his presence. The tension was no longer confined to their interactions. Other diners were beginning to notice. Whispers passed from table to table, some filled with sympathy for Shaun, others brimming with disapproval for Evelyn. Edward Clark leaned closer to his wife, Margaret, and murmured, "This is getting uncomfortable. She's digging her own grave." Margaret nodded, her eyes fixed on Shaun's unflinching calm. "It's almost admirable," she said. "He's not giving her what she wants." Evelyn was busy at the counter, speaking in hushed but pointed tones to her colleague Andrew, when the sound of polished leather shoes crossing the marble floor drew the attention of several patrons. James Thompson, the manager of Lumiere, moved briskly toward Shaun's table. A man in his early 50s, James carried himself with the practiced grace of someone used to overseeing such an establishment. But tonight, his usually calm demeanor was tinged with concern. The whispers in the dining room hushed as James approached the dimly lit corner. The manager's polished appearance, immaculate suit, silk tie, and perfectly shined shoes seemed almost incongruous next to Shaun's understated attire. Yet when James reached the table, his expression softened into something resembling reverence. "Mr. Carter," James said, inclining his head in a slight bow. His voice carried just enough volume to be heard by those nearby. "It's such an honor to have you here tonight. I sincerely apologize for the service you've received." The room froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, wine glasses poised in mid-air. Patrons turned toward the scene, their curiosity piqued by James's words. The name Carter echoed in their minds, sparking recognition. Shaun, ever composed, nodded in acknowledgement. "It's no problem, James," he replied warmly, his deep voice carrying the same calm authority that had unnerved Evelyn all night. "I just wanted a quiet meal." James straightened, but his apology continued. "Had we known you were coming, we would have ensured everything was prepared perfectly for your visit." He glanced briefly at Evelyn, his jaw tightening before he refocused on Shaun. Evelyn, standing frozen at the counter, felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Mr. Carter?" she thought, her mind racing. Her eyes widened as snippets of conversations she'd overheard began to fall into place. The whispers among patrons about a man named Carter, the philanthropist, entrepreneur, and rumored co-founder of Lumiere. A soft murmur spread through the restaurant like wildfire. "That's Shaun Carter, the billionaire?" a young man whispered to his companion. "I've read about him," another diner said, her voice tinged with awe. "He's not just wealthy, he's one of the co-founders of this place, and a major philanthropist." Lisa Chen leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing at Evelyn's pale face. "So, she's been treating the owner of the restaurant like dirt," she murmured, her tone dripping with disbelief. Evelyn's world seemed to tilt as the weight of her mistake crashed down on her. Her earlier arrogance now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She could feel the judgmental gazes of diners burning into her. The power she'd wielded with such confidence moments ago had evaporated, leaving her exposed and humiliated. James turned slightly, his piercing gaze finding Evelyn in the crowd. She flinched as if his glance alone could chastise her. Shaun, however, remained calm. He picked up his glass of water, sipping it leisurely as the room buzzed around him. He hadn't raised his voice or demanded respect, yet his presence alone had transformed the atmosphere. The whispers grew louder, blending with the growing realization that tonight was not just another luxurious evening at Lumiere. It was a moment that no one in the room would forget, least of all Evelyn Harper. The hum of conversation faded into a heavy silence as all eyes turned toward Shaun Carter. Seated at the inconspicuous corner table, he set down his water glass with a deliberate motion. His calm presence filled the room, commanding the attention of every patron, server, and staff member. Slowly, Shaun turned his gaze to Evelyn, who stood rooted near the counter, her face pale and her composure shattered. He gestured for her to approach. Evelyn hesitated, the weight of shame pressing her shoulders down. With tentative steps, she made her way to his table, avoiding the judgmental stares from the other diners. She stopped a few feet away, clutching her order pad as though it were a lifeline. Shaun leaned forward slightly, his deep voice measured and steady. "Miss Harper," he began, addressing her formally, "I've been observing you tonight. You're confident, assertive, and take pride in your work. Admirable traits for someone in your position." Evelyn blinked, the unexpected acknowledgement catching her off guard. "But," Shaun continued, his tone soft yet firm, "confidence without humility can quickly turn into arrogance, and pride without respect becomes prejudice." Evelyn's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Shaun's gaze was steady, but not unkind. "You don't need to know someone's name, their wealth, or their status to treat them with dignity," he said, his voice resonating throughout the restaurant. "Respect isn't something reserved for those who look the part. It's the foundation of every interaction, no matter who you're speaking to." Evelyn's breath hitched, and she felt tears welling in her eyes. The enormity of her mistake hung in the air, undeniable and unforgiving. She looked down at the floor, her voice trembling as she spoke. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I treated you unfairly. I was wrong. Shaun studied her for a moment, letting her words settle. Acknowledging your mistake is the first step, he said. But what truly matters is what you do next. Will you let this moment define you, or will you learn from it and grow? Evelyn's tears began to fall and she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do better. I promise. From the central table, Edward Clark exchanged a glance with his wife, Margaret. They nodded approvingly, and Margaret softly clapped her hands. The sound, gentle and deliberate, broke the silence and set off a ripple through the room. Lisa Chen, sitting nearby, joined in, her applause steady and sincere. Soon the entire restaurant erupted into polite clapping, not for Evelyn's mistake, but for the grace with which Shaun had handled it. The applause was for the lesson, one that resonated far beyond the walls of Lumiere. Shaun leaned back in his chair, his expression serene. He raised a hand slightly, signaling the room to quiet. Tonight, he said, addressing not just Evelyn but everyone, we were reminded of something important. Respect isn't earned by appearances or wealth. It's given freely, and it's what makes us human. The room sat in contemplative silence, his words sinking deep into the hearts of everyone present. Evelyn, still overwhelmed, stepped back quietly, her face a mixture of shame and newfound determination. The last customer had left, and the grand dining room of Lumiere stood in an unusual stillness. The once glittering chandeliers now cast a softer, subdued glow over the space as the staff gathered in a circle near the center. Conversations were hushed, the tension from earlier still lingering in the air. At the center of it all stood Shaun Carter, calm and composed, his towering presence drawing every gaze. James Thompson, the manager, stepped forward, addressing the group. Thank you all for staying late tonight. Mr. Carter has requested to speak with us, and I think it's important we listen. His voice was steady, but the subtle weight in his tone reflected the gravity of the evening's events. Shaun nodded to James in acknowledgement before addressing the staff, his voice firm but not harsh. I've been in your shoes before, he began, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. I've worked jobs where every customer felt like a judgment, where I believed my worth was measured by how I looked or what I wore. But Lumiere was founded on a different philosophy. This place wasn't meant to just be a restaurant. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a space where anyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, could feel welcomed. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some glancing down at the polished floor. Shaun's words weren't accusatory, but they carried a profound truth that was hard to ignore. He continued, Tonight, I saw moments where that vision faltered. And I don't say that to point fingers. I say it because we're all human, and we all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them, that we ask ourselves, how can we do better? His gaze swept over the group, resting briefly on each person before finally landing on Evelyn. Evelyn, who had been standing at the edge of the circle, took a hesitant step forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her order pad, more out of habit than necessity. She met Shaun's eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. Mr. Carter, she began, her words slow but deliberate. I made a terrible mistake tonight. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I was wrong, and I deeply regret how I treated you. A tear slid down her cheek as she continued, her voice cracking. I let my pride get in the way of what this place stands for. I'm truly sorry, not just to you but to my colleagues and to what Lumiere represents. I want to do better. I will do better. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her admission hanging heavily in the air. Shaun stepped closer, his expression softening. Thank you for saying that, Evelyn, he said, his tone steady and reassuring. Mistakes don't define us. What defines us is how we respond to them. And your willingness to acknowledge your error, that's the first step toward real growth. He turned to the rest of the staff, his voice rising slightly. This isn't just about one person's actions tonight. It's about all of us. Every decision we make, every interaction we have, reflects who we are as a team. If we want Lumiere to be the place it was meant to be, we have to hold ourselves accountable, not just to each other, but to the people who walk through our doors. The staff murmured in agreement, a sense of unity beginning to form. James stepped forward, his expression resolute. "From this moment on, we'll do better. I'll make sure of it," he said. His words met with nods from the team. As the meeting concluded, Shaun looked around the room, his voice calm but filled with hope. "Change starts here, tonight. Let's make this place everything it was meant to be, and more." The glass doors of Lumiere closed gently behind Shaun Carter as he stepped out into the quiet night. The golden glow of Beverly Hills streetlights reflected off his broad shoulders, casting long shadows as he walked down the sidewalk. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it a sense of closure. Shaun's strides were unhurried, his mind replaying the events of the evening. He thought back to his own journey, moments when he, too, had been judged unfairly for his appearance or underestimated for not fitting the mold. He remembered the lessons those experiences had taught him, that patience and kindness could break through walls of prejudice far more effectively than anger or resentment. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was still tinged with the weight of the night's events. Evelyn Harper lingered near the counter, her mind racing with a mixture of regret and resolve. For the first time in years, she truly saw Lumiere for what it could be, a beacon of warmth and acceptance, not just a pedestal of exclusivity. "I'll make it right," she whispered to herself, clutching her notepad tightly. It wasn't just a promise to Shaun, but to herself. She knew she had a long way to go, but tonight had ignited a fire within her, a determination to change, to embrace humility, and to embody the values Shaun had reminded her of. The staff, too, felt the ripple effects of Shaun's words. Conversations at the service station were different now, quieter, more introspective. James Thompson, the manager, stood near the kitchen, silently watching his team. He could sense the shift. A new standard was being set, one rooted in respect and compassion. Lumiere would no longer be just a symbol of luxury. It would become a place where kindness was served alongside every dish, a sanctuary where appearances were meaningless compared to the experience of belonging. As Shaun continued down the dimly lit street, he allowed himself a faint smile. Tonight wasn't about proving a point or exposing someone's flaws. It was about planting seeds, seeds of change, of understanding, of hope. His final thought echoed clearly in his mind, a mantra he had carried with him through years of success and struggle. True strength lies not in judgment, but in acceptance. The streetlights cast a warm glow as his figure disappeared into the night, leaving behind not just a restaurant, but a legacy of respect and compassion that would ripple far beyond the walls of Lumiere. Do you feel the weight of the lesson in Shaun's story? Imagine yourself in his place, or even in Evelyn's. What would you have done? Would you have reacted with calmness and kindness, or would the pressure have pushed you to act differently? Take a moment to reflect. How often do we judge others based on appearances or first impressions? Shaun's quiet strength reminds us that true character lies in patience, respect, and understanding. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What did this story make you feel or think about? If you were in Lumiere that evening, how would you have responded? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps us grow and create even more meaningful stories to share. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. There's so much more to come. Tales of inspiration, lessons in compassion, and reminders of the power of kindness. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and may your day be filled with respect, understanding, and a little bit of magic. See you in the next story.